Yes, I hope everyone, Eric, I'm seeing your chat. I hope everyone is enjoying the peaceful music. We thought it would be nice to have a bit of a change of pace given everything that's going on. Looks like we've got just a few more folks in the waiting room. And I think with that, we will go ahead and get started. Of course, if anyone joins later on, we'll just add them on in. But let us go ahead and get started. So thank you to everyone who was able to join this afternoon. I'll go ahead and stop the soothing music in the background. Good afternoon. My name is Evan Summers. I'm a public engagement technology specialist with Public Agenda. I'm joined this afternoon by my colleague, Jennifer Oriana. We will be guiding you all through a workshop on building better digital workshops and meetings. So our hope is that we can spend the next hour and a half or so this afternoon to give you all some ideas, some creative solutions to try and make more collaborative experiences in your meetings via Zoom or WebEx or Teams or whatever it might be that you're using. So as I mentioned, my name's Evan Summers. And Jen, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Evan. Everyone, as Evan mentioned, my name is Jennifer Orellana. I am the coordinator for the public engagement team at Public Agenda, and I work extensively with the Community Voices for Health initiative. And many of you actually may have interacted with me or have received communications from me in the past. So again, I'm here with Evan. This afternoon, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. If any of you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to pop those in the chat and we'll do our best to make sure that you get a response.
Great, thank you, Jen. And it looks like our colleagues Tristan and Nicole from Public Agenda have also joined. I know some of you from the Colorado and Georgia teams are familiar with working with Tristan. Nicole obviously works with the Pennsylvania team. So it's great to see so many folks representing so many of the different states involved in the Community Voices for Health project here. Just a couple of notes before we dive in. You'll notice that we've turned on the automated closed captioning service at the bottom of the Zoom screen. In our experience, we found that that is fairly accurate. I am going to do my best to speak clearly to make sure that that transcript is accurate, but we hope that that makes this a little bit more accessible for folks. We're also turning it on just as a way of letting everyone know that this feature exists in Zoom. So if you're hosting Zoom meetings yourself and you're working with communities who may be hard of hearing or who don't have the ability to tune into audio for whatever reason, this is a useful tool to keep in mind and take advantage of that Zoom recently introduced. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and dive in. As Jen mentioned, please feel free to interrupt at any moment with questions, either by unmuting yourself and asking them out loud, or by leaving questions in the chat. So, as I mentioned, our goal today is to offer you all a few tips and tricks and ideas for building better digital workshops, more collaborative experiences over Zoom, WebEx, Teams, Google Meet, or other platforms like that. This is a request that we've gotten quite a few times from various states, so we wanted to bring all the CVH grantees and the broader CVH community together to hopefully offer some information that can be helpful to you all. And yes, thank you for noting that in the chat, Holly. We are recording this meeting, so we will have a record of the chat transcript as well as the video. We will make that available and share that out after the meeting is concluded. If anyone would like a copy, or if you'd like to share it for folks who were unable to attend. So please do be aware that we are recording this for those purposes. And thank you, Holly, for reminding us and making sure we mentioned that. So in the spirit of collaboration and better digital engagement, we'd like to start the session today with using something called Mentimeter. So some of you may be familiar with Mentimeter already, but we're going to ask a few questions to sort of get the juices flowing and get us all started. So if you can, go to menti.com. Ideally, if you have a smartphone with you, it's easiest to participate that way. But if not, no worries. You can also pull it up on your computer. So go to menti.com and enter the code 5506093. And I will continue sharing my screen so you can see the questions and provide answers. Jen just left the link in the chat as well. So
destruction and all that. Okay, fine. But because the pandemic and because.
And just a reminder to folks, if you could please mute yourselves if you're not talking, that would be great as well. If you are able to go to menti.com, the first question is going to be a word cloud that asks, what words come to mind when you think of digital meetings or workshops? So when you think about engaging with folks in the digital space and hosting digital meetings or workshops, what words come to your mind? And the way Mentimeter works is that as your answers come in, you'll see some answers populating on the screen. They will show up here. And the larger the word, the more people who have said it. So yes, 5500693 is the code. Thank you, Jen and Alexa, for sharing. So we're getting answers right now. Zoom is coming through loud and clear. Taxing, tiring. I'm seeing frustration, opportunity. Not as engaging, tech problems. Tell me about tech problems. Low energy, isolated, interactive, frustration, stress. Lots of really, really rich, good answers here. I'll leave this up for just a few more seconds if folks want to get in their last thoughts.
Yes, ma'am. There you go. Thank you.
So what at least I'm seeing here in
Your
interpreting
boxes
this
now.
word cloud is that there are a lot of challenges that folks have with digital meetings and workshops. A lot of sort of negative words or challenging words that pop up here. Zoom, of course, is a new word that's in everybody's lexicon after 2020. But there are also words like interactive and opportunities and accessible. So perhaps some opportunities that come along with the challenges that we face in digital meetings or workshops. The next question I'd like to ask is, at the beginning of the pandemic, how effective were you when you were attending a virtual meeting and hosting a virtual meeting? And this is on a scale of you couldn't do anything that you needed to do, to you could do everything that you wanted to do. So if you can take a moment to answer those questions, and remember, this is at the beginning of the pandemic. So thinking way back forever ago to March of 2020. And I personally like this type of Mentimeter question if you're ever interested in using Mentimeter, because you can kind of see the two bars racing each other almost. I find it to be an engaging interactive graphic. So far, we're getting about a 6 out of 10 with comfort at the beginning of the pandemic on attending a virtual meeting, and about a 4.5 out of 10 on hosting a virtual meeting. So it looks like folks were maybe a little more comfortable attending than they were hosting. And I'll give it just a few moments. It looks like we've got everyone has answered in here. All right, so let's keep those numbers in mind, 5.8 and 4.7 at the beginning of the pandemic. And now let's fast forward to January of 2021. Similar questions. How effective are you currently when attending a virtual meeting or hosting a virtual meeting on a scale of you can't do anything that you need, same scale, to can do everything that you want? We've got 8 responses in so far, 10 responses. Looks like the numbers are higher now. That's great. And I think we're just waiting on a couple responses. But what it looks like here is that folks are more comfortable now and can do more of what they want now than they could before. And that's really great. One thing that we hope we can do from this workshop is to help get more folks up to the far right of this scale, if you will, and to also maybe even extend what we think the top of that scale is, to give folks some new ideas for ways, especially when hosting a virtual meeting or workshop, to create a collaborative and engaging environment. All right, so with all that said, we've got one last question, which is, which of the following tools have you used as a participant or as a host? And I've listed some of the tools that we'll talk about today, as well as a few others. So Zoom breakout rooms, Mentimeter, Google Docs, Miro, Zoom Whiteboard, Google Jamboard, other whiteboard tools, or none of the above. So a lot of folks have used Zoom and Google Docs. We've got one person who's listed other virtual whiteboard tools, a couple people. If you can add in the chat what those tools are, that would be super great.
Did you see that, Evan? Someone typed Mural. Marion
Mural,
typed,
great.
yes.
Thank you, Marion. So it looks like we've got by far the most votes to Zoom breakout rooms and Google Docs. We will be talking a little bit more this afternoon about those, but also Google Jamboard, which it looks like some of you have used. I know the Pennsylvania team, the fan team, has used that. Miro, and a few other options as well. And Adela, looks like you said it was a whiteboarding program, but now I can't remember the name. No need to apologize at all. But thank you for adding that in the chat. All right, so that was an exercise not only to sort of set the stage for the rest of this presentation, but also to give those of you who haven't yet used Mentimeter a bit of a taste of Mentimeter as a tool. I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but we use it quite a bit at Public Agenda, and I know some of our CVH partners use it as well to conduct sort of live polling and surveys at the beginning, end, or really anywhere in a workshop or presentation. So with that said, I am going to go back to my presentation and we will get started. So the agenda for this afternoon, we'll talk a little bit about setting your goals for a digital meeting. We will talk about designing equitable online engagement at least give a few important principles to keep in mind. That bullet point in and of itself is a whole multi-hour, multi-day session, which we don't have the space for today, but just want to make a note of that, but also be sure to indicate that what we discussed today is by no means the end of thinking about how to construct engagement opportunities in an equitable way online. And then we'll talk about some of the specific tools. So virtual breakout rooms, collaborative documents, online polls and quizzes, virtual whiteboards, and then putting it all together, talk through some examples and have you all share some examples about how we can combine these tools effectively, as well as conduct a little bit of hands-on practice to use some of the time we have today to get into the weeds a little bit and answer any questions that you might have about putting these out into the real world during your workshops and your meetings. But before we begin, before we dive too deep into any of the specific tools, I want to make sure that everyone is thinking about what goals you have for your online meeting, workshop, or gathering before you make a decision on what technologies you might use to help facilitate or complement it. So ask yourself questions like, will you be teaching people, coaching people, or will you be playing the role more of a facilitator? Will participants need to create their own content during the meeting? Will you instead be instructing or teaching people something specific? So is it more of a information flow from you to them, unidirectional, or is it bidirectional? Or are you facilitating a meeting? And a definition that I've come across a few times for facilitation that some of you might have seen, which I think is helpful to keep in mind if you're constructing a workshop or you're playing the role more of a facilitator than a teacher, is think of facilitating as the art of creating an environment or a container in which people create the content. So this will become apparent as we talk through some of the tools that are available, but facilitation might necessitate something different than just a standard static Zoom screen where you, as I am doing right now, are talking at people as opposed to engaging with people. A few questions to ask when it comes to access, equity, and inclusion in digital engagement. And once again, I'll go through these quickly, but these merit much bigger and larger conversations. One important question is, what are the barriers to full participation? Does a platform, for instance, require users to sign in or to create accounts? If so, are your users going to be comfortable doing that, or is that going to be a barrier to entry that they will not be able to overcome? Does a platform respect user privacy? Will all target audiences feel comfortable using the platform, especially if you're having conversations about sensitive or personal issues like health and healthcare decisions that individuals might be making? Will they feel comfortable, or should they, frankly, feel comfortable with the platforms that you are choosing to conduct your meetings or workshops on? Will people find it easy to use? Will it require training? Do you need to set aside time before a meeting or at the beginning of a meeting to give people the opportunity to get comfortable with the tools so that their discomfort doesn't become a barrier to their full participation? And are you creating opportunities for different types of inputs and learning styles, mixing in verbal engagement, visual engagement, and other sorts of learning opportunities? And then, of course, from a very practical, technical perspective, how much bandwidth is required? Do users have access to adequate bandwidth or Wi-Fi? How much would it cost if someone, for instance, had to rely on using their data plan to connect? And can you provide call-in options or traditional phone-in options if, if folks don't have access to the level of internet that they need? And of course, are you making presentations accessible to those with visual, hearing, or other sensory impairments? So I'll pause actually right there and just ask if there are any questions that folks have about what I've gone over so far, sort of setting the scene. And please also feel free to add questions in the chat, Miriam, asks, how would you be able to measure the amount for data plans? That's a really good question, Miriam. Thank you for bringing that up. So we can share out some resources afterwards, a few websites that you can go to you can essentially put in the site or app that you're using, and it will calculate how much data it would typically on average require. So I'll make a note of that. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I'll make a note of that, Miriam, that we share that out with you all after. There are a few different services that allow you to do that. And Eric, language translation services, another really important point. So I don't have any particular recommendations for language translation services off the top of my head in terms of who you would want to go to do the translation itself. That's obviously going to depend on where you are. But if you are conducting a live webinar with, say Spanish speaking and English speaking audiences, having a interpreter or a translator who provides either live captions, which you can do in Zoom with the translation, or providing multiple, spaces for sort of consecutive translation. But thinking through how you want to do that is really essential. But the two most common ways I've seen that are to have people do consecutive translation live during the Zoom, or to have the closed captions provided in a separate language. Yes, Nishana said Zoom does support multiple languages. And I think there was one other question in the chat. Nicole mentions maybe another consideration is how to make the training accessible for people who are calling in. Yes, so think about if you do offer a call-in option, is that call-in option actually giving someone the experience that you want to give them? Is there information that they wouldn't be getting by calling in that they would get if they joined via video? That's one of the reasons ahead of our training today, we sent out a message asking folks if they can to join via computer, because a lot of what we'll be doing this afternoon, you just wouldn't be able to mimic by someone calling directly in. So being very intentional about what someone calling in means, and being honest with them about what it is that they might miss if they're not able to join via a computer or a smartphone. And yes, Daphne, the slides will be shared. Thank you for asking that. So for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide, but please keep the questions coming and the suggestions coming. This is all really great stuff. Okay, so the first tip to keep in mind to sort of spice up, if you will, your digital workshops or meetings is to use virtual breakout rooms. It looked like in the Mentimeter, the vast majority of you have already engaged with or used breakout rooms. So I won't spend too much time on this, but virtual breakout rooms are a great way to mirror real world breakout rooms that you might have during a workshop, a meeting, or a conference. It's a good way to split larger groups into different subject matter areas or subtopics for discussion, and give smaller groups, I should say when you split into smaller groups, it gives people a better chance to have their voices heard. If you have a Zoom meeting of 25, 30 people, and I'm sure most of you have experienced this, the discussion or the Q&A or the ideation sessions are often dominated by just a few people who are quickest to unmute or who feel most comfortable in large groups. And that can mirror a very similar dynamic that we see in normal, quote unquote, normal in-person meetings. So setting up these smaller virtual breakout rooms can be a good way to make conversation easier and more comfortable for those folks. Also, virtual breakout rooms and smaller groups makes just the physical act of talking, of multiple people talking over Zoom easier. Unlike in in-person sessions, multiple people can't be talking at the same time during a Zoom call and still have people understand what's being said. So smaller groups makes that simultaneous conversation much simpler. A few best practices to consider if you do use breakout rooms. Consider the need to have a facilitator in each breakout session. Do you need someone from your organization to be in each of those breakout rooms to facilitate the sub conversation, or do you feel comfortable just sending your participants there sort of on their own? Do you want to manually assign participants, let people choose their own groups, or do it randomly? Be very clear about expectations in a breakout room. So note takers and report outs can be important. And one technical important piece to be aware of if you're using Zoom, when you cloud record a meeting, it is only going to record the main room. It will not automatically record all of the breakout rooms. So if you want the breakout rooms to be recorded, ensure that someone in each breakout room is in charge of recording that session and sharing it back with you. And of course, in order to use breakout rooms in your Zoom settings, you have to make sure that they are enabled. So for those who aren't familiar with breakout rooms, I'm just going to play a very quick video that shows you how to set it up and work it. This might be a helpful refresher for folks who haven't used them in a while. And then I'll stop for a moment to take any questions about breakout rooms.
Hey everyone, Farah from Zoom here. On this brief video, we're going to show you how you can leverage our breakout room feature to take a large meeting or virtual classroom and split it up into smaller groups or sessions. You'll see that I have already enabled the breakout room feature, which you can find in your settings along the bottom. And that breakout room button will actually be right here. This is a button that only your hosts or co-hosts will be able to see. And right now we don't have a co-host in the session. If I manage my participants, I can hover over Catherine, for example, to make her a co-host. So she'll see this button now as well. When we're ready to split the group into smaller sessions, I can easily click this button to get a pop-up window asking me how many rooms I'd like to assign out and how many participants per room. For this example, it's recommending, since there are 6 people, we can split it up into 2 rooms. I can do this automatically or manually. So if we click on the automatic button, it'll generate those breakout rooms for us. Certainly, if there's anyone I want to swap out, maybe I want to move Michael to the other room, I can exchange him for a different participant. Once I'm ready to open all rooms, I'll click this Open All Rooms button, and our participants will be able to join the sessions that we've created for them. So we'll slowly see those people join. One thing that's really important to note is that as a host or a co-host, you can actually hop between the different rooms to talk to the participants. You can see here, I have the join button. Now everybody's left to go to the rooms. I can broadcast a message to everybody and say, wrapping up in 1 minute. And this will broadcast the message. And then I can close the rooms, which gives them a 1-minute timer to rejoin our session. We'll give everybody a second to rejoin, and I'll show you 1 or 2 additional features with breakout rooms. There we go. We can kind of see everybody kind of popping back in. Now everybody's rejoined the main session. You'll see that I have the opportunity to reopen these rooms again, which is really great. If you have a very long session or a very long virtual class, you can split into these virtual smaller groups as often as you'd like. And the additional options here will allow you to automatically close breakout rooms after a specified amount of time. You can also change the countdown timer to be 30 seconds or 2 minutes if you like. I'll show you a setting where you can also pre-assign folks to be in your breakout room before the classroom starts. You'll want to navigate over to the class that's already been created in your Zoom portal. Under the Meetings tab, you can find your meeting. Scrolling all the way to the bottom, you'll see if we open this to re-edit it, I have the opportunity to pre-assign a breakout room here. And I can create the rooms and upload a CSV with all of my participants in advance so that their names are already populated in the room when I start the session. That's basically how you can run breakout rooms. We hope you found this video helpful. If you have any additional questions, please visit us at support.zoom.us. Thanks so much.
All right, so I'll end the video there, but I hope that that was helpful to folks. I figured no need to recreate the wheel when Zoom has put together a very simple explainer video on how to use breakout rooms. But I'd like to pause for just a moment and ask folks if if they have any questions about how to use breakout rooms or why you might want to use breakout rooms, or if any folks who have used them already, particularly as a host in any meetings, have any lessons or best practices that they'd be interested in sharing from their experience. And you can feel free to share those in the chat or over audio. I'll give it just a few seconds for folks to find the unmute button, or if not, I will continue along
I have a
with the
question.
presentation.
I have a question about if you are the one creating the breakout rooms and you're doing breakout rooms relatively early in a particular meeting, so it's likely that you'll have people kind of straggling in, but you still want to get the breakout room started. Can you leave? What happens to people if they join the meeting when everyone's in a breakout room? Should the host stay in the main room and then that way they'll see when people come in? Or if you could just cover how that works with what happens when someone joins a meeting if everybody else is in a breakout room? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, that does. That's a very good question. My understanding is that you want someone in a best practice situation, you want someone to stay back in the main room who can then sort of facilitate people into the breakout rooms so that, you know, if there's a straggler and someone joins late, you're able to then add that person into a new breakout room. So that would be my recommendation. The last time I tried breakout rooms as a host, I was not able to join a breakout room myself. I had to be in the main room. It is possible that that has changed with Zoom, so don't quote me on that. But as a general best practice, I would recommend having someone in the main room who stays back, who's able, if you think people might be trickling in, who's able to facilitate people into those breakout rooms. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
if I may, really quickly, just on that last point you made, as a host in Zoom, you can join breakout rooms, but you're just not automatically sorted into it. You're
great.
left in the main room, but you can join any of the main rooms and hop between them if you choose to.
Great. Thank you, Tristan. And yeah, breakout rooms are available in the basic version of Zoom, Polly, to answer your question. And Miriam mentions a really, really good best practice there to give tasks that fit the time allotted to the breakout rooms. That is very important. The number of breakout rooms I've been in over the past year where you all of a sudden have 30 seconds left and what feel like an hour's worth of work to do. It's been too many to count. So yes, make sure that you're properly assigning and being clear about those assignments in breakout rooms, particularly because guests, depending on how you set it up, might not have the ability to easily hop back into the main room or might not be very adept at doing that. So you want to make sure that you are, or someone is either there to facilitate the conversation or on hand to hop between the rooms to answer questions.
This is Shelley Meeks. I don't know if this is a question or just a comment, but some of the breakout rooms or some workshops or sessions I've been in, every time we go into a breakout room, it's like random. So we're not with the same people. And I don't know that in every case that that's a good practice. You know, I think sometimes depending on the work you're doing, staying with the same people that you've gotten to know might be more beneficial. So I think some thought needs to be given to that as well. I mean, I know the randomness in meeting new people is important, but sometimes I think it inhibits the work, especially if they're not giving you enough time to do what you need to do.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you for sharing that, Shelley. And just from a pure technical perspective, when you set up breakout rooms, you can reuse them later in the meeting. So by default, it makes it easy for you to send people back into those same rooms over the course of the meeting so that you don't, as you mentioned, Shelley, mix people back up into groups and they have to reintroduce themselves and all of that. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Adela's comment about the awkward staring contests. I think we've all experienced that at some point over this past year. So Adela, And Alexa, thank you for sharing that as well. For the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next example, but please feel free to continue adding questions into the chat, and Tristan, Jen, and the team will either answer those in the chat or bring that up through audio as well. So very quickly, I'll just touch on Google Docs or other shared documents as a tool that you can use. It looks like, based on the Mentimeter, a lot of you have used or are familiar with this option as well. Google Docs can be a great option to collaborate with a large group of people on a single, say, notes document or ideation page or outline. It can ensure that everyone is both digitally and figuratively on the same page. It also can be a good tool to use to take some of the burden away from yourself as the host when it comes to note taking, so that you don't have to both facilitate and be the only person taking notes. And it can create more equitable access to collaborating on written outputs. I find Google Docs can also be a good way to allow people to contribute who feel a little less comfortable sharing their ideas over audio, or sort of unmuting themselves and speaking up. Google Docs can be a good way for people to share in an avenue that's a little bit less intimidating, so to speak, for some. A few best practices to consider. Think about data privacy. Is it okay to create a public link to the Google Doc? You will want to do that if you don't know everybody who will be contributing and just want to share out a link to a large group of people and say, hey, everybody, click on this link, come join, and make some edits. If you do that, keep in mind that anybody who ends up with the link would be able to access it. So if there's particularly private information or sensitive information that's being included in the document, maybe that's not the route that you want to go. Keep in mind that Google Docs are great for written output, but obviously not very flexible in terms of format. Better, I find at least, for relatively small to medium-sized groups in synchronous situations, but it can also work well for larger groups in asynchronous situations. So maybe you have a group of 50 or 100 people who are contributing to a document over the course of a few weeks, but if you have 100 people in one Google Doc at the same time, that will be chaotic and very difficult to use. And also, be aware of the difference between the editing, commenting, and suggestions mode. This is one difference that I see a surprising number of people aren't aware of. But in the upper right of a Google Doc, there is a little down arrow where you can change from editing versus suggesting versus viewing. Be sure to be clear with folks if you're using a Google Doc how you want them to edit it, and take advantage of the fact that the suggestions mode, which is akin to track changes in Microsoft Word, can be a good way of having people make edits without totally changing the document. So I'll leave it at that and move on for the sake of time, but please feel free to add any questions in the chat. Daphne, I just see you ask, is there a minimum or maximum number of breakout rooms you can use on the same meeting? I don't believe that there is no minimum. And as Tristan said, you can make as many breakout rooms as there are people in the group. So in theory, there's a maximum, but not from a practical perspective. So I sometimes threaten Tristan with putting him in a breakout room by himself in our meetings, just, to keep accountability. Okay, and sorry, I just saw one more note in the chat from Eric. Yeah, really great comment there, Eric. So I'll just read it out loud so folks can see it. So if you have multiple discussion topics for assigned groups to cover, consider that they start in one breakout room, discuss, and then come back to the main room to report out on a topic, and then put them back in the breakout room for a new topic, and sort of repeat that process until everyone's discussed. That can be a good way, to the point that was raised earlier about keeping some of that continuity that people build in those breakout rooms. All right, so I'll go through the next tip now. Consider various tools, including Mentimeter as one example that we at Public Agenda use quite a bit, to integrate polls, quizzes, and Q&A into your presentations. These can be great opportunities for collecting feedback from your participants or the audience. They're particularly well suited for large groups. Do you want people to vote on predetermined questions or options? If so, Mentimeter or other tools like Slido or other options like it can be really good choices. You can inject audience participation into a training, a webinar, or educational workshop. So Mentimeter can be a good way in an otherwise sort of stale presentation to sort of inject the ability for the audience to wake up a little bit and interact and provide their feedback. If you don't have something like that in your workshop or meeting, consider using Mentimeter as a way to sort of inject a little bit of collaboration in there. And Mentimeter is also nice, as well as other tools like it, because they're built for people to participate from their mobile devices. Some limits to tools like this so that guests can't create their own content. So Mentimeter is not a great option for ideation or for creativity or expression of new ideas. It's better to get feedback on sort of an existing structure of ideas or questions that you have. It requires a second tab or an additional device. It can be difficult to create new content on the fly, as I mentioned. There's no built-in video chat feature for Mentimeter, so it limits some of the collaborative features that something like Zoom would. And it's not ideal for facilitating free flow or creative sessions. There is also a cost associated with Mentimeter. The free plan only allows you to have one question, which is very limited. So for all practical purposes, you need the basic plan, which costs $10 a month to use Mentimeter in any sort of meaningful way for your workshops. So keep that in mind. If you haven't used Mentimeter before as a host, you all have now used it as a participant. I'm going to play this short tutorial just to show you how it works, to give you a little bit of a flavor and an idea. And while this is playing, if anyone has any questions that come
Welcome
up,
to Mentimeter.
add them to the chat.
This short video will show you how to create your first interactive presentation. This is your home view. Here you can see an overview of all your presentations. Select New Presentation to start creating. Welcome to the Edit view. This is where you create your presentation. On the right-hand side, you will see all the different question types and quick slide layouts you can choose from. I've selected an image choice question type, where you can add GIFs and images on each answer. Under Your Question, add the question you want to ask your audience. I will ask my audience if they have used Mentimeter before. Now I'm going to add 3 different answer options. You can also add images here if you have an image choice slide. And that's it. Click Present to use the presentation in front of a live audience. Your audience should go to menti.com and type in the code shown at the top of your screen to participate. Press the F key to go into full screen mode and watch your audience vote in real time. And there you have it, your first interactive presentation with Mentimeter.
All right, so that's a little intro with a nice British accent about Mentimeter. If there are any questions that folks have about that, please feel free to add it in the chat. But if not, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next tip, which is virtual whiteboarding. So I think this starts to get into territory where, at least based on our Mentimeter poll from earlier, less folks are familiar, less folks have used some of these tools. Virtual whiteboarding can be a really great way to recreate some traditional, important in-person engagement exercises into your digital meetings, workshops, whatever you want to call them. So one good example that virtual whiteboarding can help with is brainstorming or workshopping ideas, strategy and idea mapping. So things like the traditional sticky notes on a wall exercise that you might do with working groups or with committees or in breakout rooms, you can mimic using virtual whiteboarding tools. Virtual whiteboarding can also be good for process visualization and design, something where you might want to stand in front of an actual whiteboard and draw things out together. Especially for more visual learners, it can be hard to recreate that in sort of a static Zoom meeting. So think about virtual whiteboard options to help recreate that sort of engagement. And then you can also use virtual whiteboards, as I'm doing right now, actually, to enhance the structure of online workshops and meetings. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So a few best practices to keep in mind when using virtual whiteboard tools: Jamboard, Miro, Eric just mentioned Padlet, Zoom Whiteboard. There are a few different examples that do similar things. Pick the tool that makes the most sense for your needs and for your audience. We'll mention a few examples here, and I'll highlight how some of them do some things better and others are a better fit for different scenarios that might have more complex needs. Practice before you use something in a real meeting or workshop. This goes without saying, but don't decide the day before a presentation that you want to use Jamboard, for instance, and then figure out during the presentation that you're not quite sure how to use it. Give yourself some time to practice and also build in time for people to get familiar with using a new tool. If you're going to rely on one of these tools to be the centerpiece of facilitation, of digital facilitation for your workshop, you want to make sure that you give people time to get comfortable with it. Otherwise, the product that people will end up creating or the output from your meeting is not going to be very valuable. Think about access. Will you need your whiteboards to be public, accessible by anyone with a link, or shared to specific people? Some of those same questions that you want to ponder when using Google Docs or other shared documents. Think about barriers to access. Do people need to sign in to use the virtual whiteboard? Can people join from a mobile device, or is it much easier to use from a computer? Test that out, practice that out yourself. And I'll talk about that in these tools that we're going to go over in just a moment. And then think about cost. Are you willing to pay a little bit of money for a perhaps more robust virtual whiteboarding tool, or is your budget limit free? And do you want to sort of limit yourself to that? So one first example, and just to be very frank, I kind of hate this tool, but I think it's important to be aware of, is the built-in whiteboard to Zoom. And it can be good for some things, but it's relatively limited in what it can do. Zoom's built-in whiteboard is quick and easy to access because it's integrated directly with Zoom. So it has a plus there. You can control when others can annotate or add to the whiteboard. You can easily display the name of who is annotating on the whiteboard. And it's also included when you record your whiteboard. So it makes the notes that you take on the virtual whiteboard downloadable and saved along with the recording of a meeting. And it's also free with Zoom, so there's no cost considerations. That all makes Zoom Whiteboard nice. What I personally at least don't like is that it's very limited in its ability to annotate and its annotation capabilities. I've found in my experience that it's less intuitive to use than other virtual whiteboard programs, and it's limited on mobile devices. So if someone is joining a Zoom meeting from a mobile device, it's more difficult for them to add to and even see what's going on a Zoom whiteboard. So I think if you are going to use Zoom Whiteboard, it's best for situations like quickly illustrating a visual element of a lesson that you're giving via Zoom, or to very quickly gather simple visual input from a small group of participants. But it sort of buckles under the pressure of larger sort of like sticky note type exercises or other sorts of whiteboard exercises that you might conduct in a normal, quote unquote, normal in-person meeting. So for those who haven't used Zoom Whiteboard, I'm going to play this quick screencast I took of what it looks like. So for those not familiar, You can create a Zoom whiteboard by clicking on the share screen button and the whiteboard option when you're a host in Zoom. And if you click share, you will create a whiteboard that people can see. And then if you give everyone access, they have the ability to use the draw tool as a little sort of built-in pen or pencil to draw on the whiteboard and add their thoughts. You can add or disable participants' ability to annotate and show the name of the people annotating on the whiteboard through your settings. As I mentioned, you can save the whiteboard as a PDF and download it and share it out. And in addition to using the pen to draw, people can also create simple text boxes to write information on the whiteboard. But that's sort of the limit of your ability to annotate, is using that pen and using that text box. You can clear the drawings, you can create multiple whiteboard screens, and you can, as I mentioned, save and share out the information that you put together on the whiteboard by downloading it as a PDF. But that's sort of the limit of Zoom Whiteboard. I'm going to pause here for any questions about Zoom Whiteboard, comments or experiences that people have had using Zoom Whiteboard, and any thoughts that they have about whether or how that might be useful or helpful for them.
So I've been in the meeting before where we had to use that, and it's a little bit tough because once we were using a text function, but it's hard to click and drag everybody's response into, like, make it a little bit more organized and clean on it, because text will kind of overlap on each other. So you have to have somebody kind of click and drag it, and it can kind of get hard to do as a facilitator, in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Eric. I definitely echo some of the same frustrations with it. Anyone else want to share? If not, we can hop on over to the next tool. All right, so Zoom Whiteboard is one simple built-in option that you can do a little bit with, but if you're trying to engage a little bit more robustly, I might recommend that you take a little step up to something called Jamboard, which is developed by Google. And this is one that we're actually going to practice with in just a moment. So you don't just hear me talking about this tool. I'll invite us all to practice and try it out. So some of the pros of Jamboard are that people can participate who are not in a Zoom meeting. So it works well with other video platforms. It's not tied directly to Zoom. It's easy to share with specific people or to make open to anyone who you give a link to for universal access. And you can also download it and share it after the fact as sort of a notes document. I find, at least, and we'll see what you all think in just a moment, that it has a more intuitive editing interface compared to Zoom Whiteboard. And it adds the ability to add sticky notes, which can be a nice option that people tend to be more familiar with. And it's free to use as long as you have a free Google account. Some of the cons are that it's not directly integrated with a video meeting, so it requires you to share out an additional link and have people open an additional tab or window in their browser to use during a Zoom meeting like this. It is somewhat limited, but less so than Zoom's Whiteboard and its annotation capabilities, and it's limited on mobile devices unless you have people install the Jamboard app. It's pretty easy to use if people install the Jamboard app, but most people will not install that app for just a one-time meeting or workshop. So I find Zoom Jamboard or Google Jamboard, to be good for quick brainstorming and design sessions with small groups across any video platform, idea generation, mapping, and grouping during workshops and trainings. So I know some of you, particularly the Pennsylvania team, have used this in the past, but let's try one out. I'll share a link to one in just a moment, but first I'm going to play the short video just so everyone has a bit of a preview of what it will look like when we go there. So jamboard.google.com is a basic page that you can go to as the host to create a Jamboard if you wanted to. You can click that plus button to create a new jam, is what Google calls it, and title it whatever you want. You can share a Jamboard, as I mentioned, with individual people or by making the link accessible to anybody. And then you can copy that link and share it out with anybody who might be attending your meeting. You have a, much like in the Zoom whiteboard, a pen or a pencil tool that you can use to write inspirational messages like, hey, on the board. You have an eraser, a select tool, and also sticky notes. So as I mentioned, this is something that Jamboard has that Zoom Whiteboard doesn't, that people find easy to use. So you can add sticky notes, choose different colors, and save them to the board. Move them around and group them however you might want. And you also have the ability to create shapes, import images, which was that button on the left just above, right here, just below the sticky note. Allows you to import images, and then you can create text boxes as well, just as you could do on the Zoom whiteboard. You can create multiple frames, and you can export those frames as a PDF or any sort of document if you so desire. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and try out Jamboard. So Jen, if you could share a link to the Jamboard in the chat, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you all can click on that link and join me on the Jamboard, I'm going to ask that everyone create or include an image with their favorite food. Sorry for not a more creative category there, but add an image with your favorite food and add a sticky note answering the question, how we're doing so far. And you can add an image or a sticky note using the toolbar on the left-hand side of your screen. You'll see the sort of square with two little lines on it is the sticky note button. And the square with the image on it, the little mountain icon, is the add image button. So I'll give folks a moment to add themselves here and add the images and the sticky notes. And feel free to unmute yourselves and announce what food you might be adding or what sticky note you might be adding if you'd like. Looks like we've got some very good options for the food here. And Tristan asks a question in the Jamboard, where do the graphics come from? Tristan, by graphics, I assume you mean the images?
I think someone is impersonating me, but you can go ahead and explain that anyway.
Oh, the images? Yeah, so the images just pull from a Google search. So if you click the image button, you can either upload them directly from your computer or go over to Google image search and type in sushi, if that's what you wanted to upload as your favorite food, and click on that image. So we've got some really good options in here. This is making me quite hungry at 4:30 Eastern time. We've got sushi, popcorn, looks like ramen, tacos, chocolate chip cookies, pasta dish of some sort, lobster. Is that okay, salmon. Wow, a casserole of some sort. All right, I should turn my attention back to the Zoom and away from thinking about food. And glad to see that folks are liking the Jamboard. My dog is tired. We're digesting. I appreciate whoever shared that. And glad to see that folks are finding this fun and engaging. If anybody has used Jamboard in the past that they'd like to share their experience, or if anyone wants to unmute themselves and share any thoughts they have about questions that they have about this, if it seems usable, user-friendly, if you like it, please feel free to unmute yourselves or pop those in the chat.
Hi, I was wondering, can you make this anonymous?
Yes. So if people are, pardon me, if you are logged into your Google account, when you open a Jamboard, it will associate that with your account. So you'll notice um, you might be able to see Treston's icon and Daphne's icon. It looks like because they're logged into their Google account as using this. But if you want it to be anonymous, you can ask people to log out of their account, or you can simply instruct people to open up the link in an incognito window or another browser in which they're not signed in. Does that answer the question, Miriam, I hope?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Any other questions on Jamboard or comments, concerns? All right, silence is golden for the moment, at least. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my presentation and share my screen.
Evan, we
talk-
have another question.
Sorry. If someone, so Jesse
From
asks,
Jess.
if someone doesn't have Google, can they still use it? Yes. They can still use it as a participant without Google. You have to have a Google account to create a Jamboard, but anybody, so long as they have the link, can participate on the Jamboard. So that's another nice thing about it, is it doesn't require people, if you share it so that anyone with the link can access it, it doesn't require people to sign in or to have that Google account. Really important question. Thanks for asking. And Adela, are we able to like or vote on sticky notes or other entries on Jamboard? Another great question. There is no built-in voting feature in Jamboard. The next tool that I'm going to go over, Miro, does have that. So we'll talk about that in just a second. What some people do on Jamboard, if they want to have people vote, is they'll ask people to add a shape or a text box or a sticky note, a small sticky note next to an image. So for instance, if we wanted people to vote on their favorite food, I could say, everyone, please put a sticky note on a green sticky note, maybe on whatever your favorite food is. And so if you're still on the Jamboard, you might be able to see that I'm creating a green sticky note right now called favorite, and I'm going to make it a little smaller and put it on the lobster because that's my favorite food. So that's a way you could sort of mirror or create voting, but there's no built-in option. Oh, I am having audio problems. Is the audio still an issue?
Yes,
Jen, is it doing the Darth Vader thing?
it is. Yeah, it's feedback on when you speak, but I think we can hear you. Can everyone
Okay.
hear Evan, even though it's a little garbly at the end?
Yeah, can you all understand me? If not, be terrified by my voice. Okay. All right. So I'll go ahead and share my screen for the last tool, which is Miro. So give me just a moment. Okay, can everyone see my screen again? Great. So if you want to take a little bit of a step further beyond something simple like Jamboard, you can use a tool like Miro. Miro is, it costs money. You have to pay for a subscription for it. So I should make that very clear at the start. But it allows you to better structure and facilitate meetings and workshops. So I'm actually using Miro right now to run this sort of slideshow that I've been going through over the past hour and a half or so. Miro also allows for advanced editing beyond just sticky notes. It has built-in features for timers, voting, and attention management that I'll highlight a few of in just a moment. You can create different sections within a single Miro board to break up and create spaces for different sections or portions of a workshop. It also has a built-in video chat feature. So if you don't want to have people on a Zoom, you can have them join in video chat directly within Miro. And it's got some really helpful template libraries and custom templates for repeated meetings or workshops for things like ideation sessions or brainstorming or some really common meeting types or workshop types that you might encounter. And there are no limits on the number of collaborators for your boards. So you can have 5 people or 500 people collaborating on a board all at the same time. Some of the cons to Miro is that it's a little bit harder to learn and it requires more training time. So if you expect people to really dive in and use Miro with you at a workshop, I would recommend setting some time ahead at the start of a meeting or in the week prior to a meeting to give people a chance to practice and familiarize themselves with the tools. The controls are also less intuitive for people who might be less tech savvy or not quote unquote digital natives. And it is paid if you want to invite guests via a public link, which I'll be doing with you all in just a moment. And that version is $16 a month. So it's not exorbitantly expensive, but it adds up and it's not nothing. And also, it is recommended that people have at least 8 megabytes per second for full performance of a Miro board. So that is by far fine for most people, but for some of you working in states with large rural populations, or if you're working with people and trying to engage with people who don't have access to stable internet, Miro might not be the best option given it's slightly higher than Zoom or Google Jamboard requirements for bandwidth. And Miro is best for full facilitation of interactive meetings and workshops. So if you're trying to just do something simple like the ideation exercise or the sticky note exercise we just did, Jamboard or Zoom Whiteboard is probably your best option, but Miro is something that's worth looking into for a little bit more robust suite of digital collaboration tools. So I am going to play a short video or part of a short video to show you all some of the features in Miro, and then we're going to go and I'm going to ask you all to join me on this Miro board and we'll play around with it and test it out.
Sign up and jump right in. Add an agenda with goals for the session. Get started fast with the right templates. Create a structure, add frames, and lock any content you don't want people to mess with. Now, send out the invites. Finally, it's the moment of truth. Set the right vibe. Align everyone around goals. Go over the basic tools. Start with an icebreaker to warm everyone up. Keep the group focused, engaged, and productive. Summarize what's been done and discuss the next steps. Transform the results into a presentation on the spot, or wait until later. Run a quick retrospective. Give everyone a high five. The team did great. Your team can accomplish great things in Miro too. Try it for yourself. Meet Kevin.
So I hope you all enjoyed meeting Kevin, the Miro spokesperson / advertiser. But that gives you just a little bit of a flavor of what Miro can do. And I'd like to spend most of the rest of the time we have practicing on Miro and giving everyone a chance to join me here on this Miro board. So Jen, if you could share out the Miro link, I am going to show you all what voting on Miro looks like. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to ask you all to join me on that Miro board. I see people are coming in right now. I'll give it a few moments until we get everybody here into Miro, and then I'll get started. So just hold on, all of you guest editors, guest thinkers, and guest developers are the names that Miro assigns you. And once we get the full group in, I will show you how you can vote. Okay, so looks like we've got enough of a quorum at least. So you'll see I've created a screen right now with with screenshots of each of the 5 tools that we focused on today. So Zoom breakout rooms, Zoom whiteboard, Jamboard, Mentimeter, and what we're using right now, Miro. So one of the really nice features about Miro, and Adela, I believe it was you who asked about voting on Jamboard earlier. One of the nice features about Miro is that it builds in voting. So I'm going to, in just a moment, start a vote and ask you all to vote for which of these options, and you'll be given 3 votes, which of the options you think would be most interesting or useful to you. So I'm going to bring everyone to where I am on the screen. And I am going to start a vote. So we have 3 minutes to vote. Everyone should see a vote option pop up on their screen. And you can click the plus sign on the images that you would like to vote for. And you can allocate your 3 votes however you want. So all 3 votes on one tool, or you can spread the 3 votes out across. Make your voice heard. And if there are any issues or questions as we're going through this, please feel free to unmute yourself or to pass them along. And we've got 1 minute left in the voting. I'll give folks just a few minutes, or just another minute, in case they haven't yet voted. And it looks like everyone has, so I'm going to end the voting now. And you all should see a little notification that I ended the voting and the ability to view the results once they've been processed. Jen, are you seeing that all right?
I am.
Great. Okay, so it looks like we've got, it's a pretty close vote here at the top. 9 votes for Jamboard, 8 votes for Mentimeter, 8 votes for Zoom breakout rooms, 7 votes for Miro, and probably because I talked negatively about Zoom Whiteboard, I biased the decision, only 3 votes for Zoom Whiteboard. So this gives you, I hope, a little bit of a sense of how the voting feature in Miro can work. One thing that's nice about Miro voting is that you can set specific segments of your board to be voted on. So I limited the ability to vote there just on those 5 images, but I could also give people the ability to vote on any text or images or segments of the screen that I wanted. And you can set up multiple votes, or anybody can create their own vote and start it if they want. So I see you all moving around the screen. I'm now going to move a little further down and pull you all to my screen. So I'm going to use one of the attention features in Miro called Bring Everyone to Me. So you might notice that your screen moves down a little bit. Do you all see that? So I've that's a nice thing that a host can do in Miro, is draw everybody's attention to the board. So if people get sort of lost in different segments, or someone says, hey, I can't find this part of the board that I'm supposed to be working on, you can bring them either as an individual or everybody on the board to you. So if you want to set up your own vote or view past voting results that you might have missed, you can click there's sort of a very faint 2 arrows in the bottom left of your screen to open up a bottom toolbar. And for voting, you could click the thumbs up icon. and create a new voting session if you want it. As I mentioned, when voting, it can help to bring everyone to your screen before you start the vote so that they're looking at the stuff that you want them to vote on. And then you could click vote now to get started. So you'll also see on the bottom of the screen, there are different icons. So I can see people are starting to use some of the highlighting and editing icons. You can also, there's a built-in chat in Miro. So I will send a chat in Miro to show you all what that looks like. And you may see that pop up on the side of your screen. There is also a timer. So I can set a timer on this Miro board for 5 minutes because I want to make sure that we wrap this part up with 5 minutes or in 5 minutes so that we leave some time for questions. And I'll just give a few moments for folks, just a minute for folks to play around with some of the features of the screen. So I see people using stickers, emojis. If anyone wants to add in or have people vote on something, they could do that as well. And so one thing you'll notice about this is it can pretty quickly become chaotic. So one of the nice features about Miro is that you can limit what people are able to do. So I set this up so that everyone has access to edit whatever they want, however they want it, but you could limit access so that people only have the ability, or certain people only have the ability to edit or edit certain things. All right, so I'm going to move over to one other nice feature that you can use in Miro, and that's sort of the ideation feature. So I'm going to bring everyone to my screen again, and you should see this board of sticky notes with a question at the top. How could you use these tools or a combination of them to enhance your virtual work? Let's list some ideas on the stickies below. So you can either create your own sticky or click on an existing sticky, double click, I should say, on an existing sticky and type in your idea. So let's give it a couple minutes for people to ideate. And what I'd challenge you all to think about is not only how could you use Miro, but how could you use some of these other tools that we went over today or others that you know of to enhance the collaboration in your digital meetings or workshops, either by combining tools, using one tool, I should say, or maybe changing your approach. So we'll give it 2 minutes and 40 seconds as the timer says, and then we will move forward by reviewing the ideas. All right, we're getting some good ideas in here. Just about a minute more. And apologies if you all can hear my Slack notifications in the background. I'm not sure if that noise is coming through.
Your audio's cleared up, Evan.
Oh, good. I did drink a glass of water, so who knows?
And your computer had some hummus.
Yeah, well, that's my Slack notification. It brings me joy, so. All right, about 25 seconds. If anyone has a few last ideas that they'd like to add to those sticky notes. And I'll just start to read off some of these that people have listed. So mind mapping and brainstorming and voting, two really good options or ideas. Increasing engagement. And you'll hear we got that little notification of the timer going off. Keep the meeting engaged, someone says. System mapping, brainstorming and priority setting, idea sharing, increasing participation, a good way to stay engaged, interactivity to make digital meetings more engaging. So these are great ideas. I can see people still floating around and adding more sticky notes and other comments and features to the Miro board. So for the sake of time, feel free to stay in and play around with the Miro board if you'd like, even after the meeting, if you want to test around and play around with it. But I'm going to ask us to come back to the Zoom and to just wrap up by asking any questions that we might have, letting us know if there are any of these tools that we can clarify. I just see Shelley's comment about being able to hear and understand Ovator. And if not, obviously feel free to reach out to us after the call, but just want to leave a little bit of space for some question and answer. All right. Well, if there are no questions, then I will leave us with just one announcement for all of you involved in the CVH project. So first off, we'll go ahead and share the recording of this presentation as well as the Miro board. So if you want to share this with any of your colleagues or other folks that you're working with in your different states, please feel free to do that. And also an announcement that Nicole will be putting together a series of workshops coming up in the next month or so focused on equitable and inclusive engagement. So this is going to be a series of conversations that Nicole and some folks that she knows will be hosting that we will invite all of you to, focused specifically on equitable and inclusive engagement. So please keep an eye out for the announcements for those coming out. I'm not sure if one of them has already been sent out, Nicole, but if you want to add anything more about that.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Evan and Jen, for this amazing workshop. And it actually tees up really well a workshop that, or actually a conversation that we are going to start hosting. So it looks like it'll be the last Wednesday of each month. We are kicking off our equitable and inclusive engagement conversation series. And it's not so much of a workshop, it's a sharing of what we're thinking about, regarding engagement. The first one will be January 27th, which is a Wednesday from 1 p.m. until about 2:30. And in that conversation, we'll be looking at how to make your virtual space more inclusive, especially towards persons with disabilities. So it's really a great follow-up to this. Again, we're sharing some thoughts, myself and another colleague, Paul Corey, on what we've been learning and what he's experienced, and then opening up the conversation to others. And then the following month, I guess I'll announce, I'll be well, hopefully I'm able to announce this. Actually, Daphne Vivared and some other friends of ours will be doing a conversation on engagement, especially sharing some experiences from women of color in resilience and disaster rebuilding. So it should be really cool. But every month we'll be doing every month we'll be doing a conversation. I wanted to be the first to invite you all there. So we'll send out more. Jennifer will be sending out more information.
Great, thank you, Nicole. So we definitely encourage you all to join for those conversations. As Nicole said, Jennifer will be sending out a little bit more information to the CVH folks with details on all that. But please let us know either via email or however you'd like to reach out, probably via email. If you have any questions about this, we'll be sharing out these materials, and please, if we haven't made it clear, don't hesitate to share these materials out with other folks in your states. Don't feel any reason to not do that. So thank you all again for taking some time this afternoon. I know it's a very intense time for all of us. So I appreciate you all turning your attention to this for a little bit of time this afternoon. And I hope everyone is taking care of themselves and staying safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.